1 week after the bombardment of Fort Sumter and the beginning of the American Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a naval blockade of all southern ports. This marked the implementation of the Anaconda Plan, a strategy to economically strangle the Confederacy. One crucial target in this blockading strategy was Port Royal Sound, the second largest and second deepest natural harbor on the Atlantic coast. On October 28, 1861, a fleet of transports followed by a squadron of Union warships, commanded by Flag Officer Samuel F. DuPont, set sail from Hampton Roads, Virginia, towards Port Royal, South Carolina. Their goal was to seize the strategically important Port Royal Sound, establish a coaling station, and create a base of operations for the Union blockade of the southeast Atlantic coastline from Cape Fear to the Florida Keys. Despite strict attempts at secrecy, Confederate officials were well aware of the Union's intentions and had constructed provisional fortifications to defend Port Royal Sound. Fort Beauregard on Bay Point, commanded by Colonel R.G.M. Dunavant, and Fort Walker on Hilton Head, commanded by Colonel William C. Hayward, stood guard at the mouth of the Sound. These forts, along with a small Confederate naval presence, were the only obstacles the Union fleet faced. The Union fleet of the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, consisting of 17 warships and 60 transports and coaling schooners, was the largest fleet assembled in American history up to that time. It carried approximately 12,000 soldiers, commanded by Brigadier General Thomas W. Sherman. Among the Union naval forces were about 600 Marines, and commander of the warship Pocahontas, Percival Drayton, the brother of Confederate Brigadier General Thomas F. Drayton, who commanded the overall defenses of Port Royal Sound. Originally planned as a combined Army-Navy amphibious campaign, the Union forces faced challenges when a storm scattered their fleet and caused the loss of vital landing craft, supplies, and ammunition. Waiting for favorable conditions for the invasion, they regrouped on November 5, 1861, and prepared for a new plan. On the morning of November 7, 1861, the Union column of 15 warships advanced towards the mouth of Port Royal Sound. The Union ships began their bombardment, and the Confederate forts offered token resistance. The inexperienced Confederate gunners struggled to inflict damage on the moving Union fleet. The Union fleet executed formation sailing in an elliptical pattern, circling between the forts and changing their course and speed, confusing the Confederate artillerists. The battle raged for approximately 4 hours, and the Confederate forces eventually ran low on ammunition and abandoned the devastated forts. The Battle of Port Royal resulted in relatively low casualties for both sides. The Union squadron suffered 31 casualties, while the Confederates lost 63. The Union victory secured a base of operations and facilitated the blockade of southern ports, creating hardships for the Confederacy. Following the victory, Union forces occupied Hilton Head Island and nearby Beaufort, becoming the first southern city occupied by federal troops. Hilton Head was designated the headquarters of the Federal Department of the South, commanding Union initiatives in the states of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, and ultimately having a population nearing 50,000, civilian and military. Fearing capture and persecution, area slaveholders had evacuated, abandoning their slaves and property in their haste to flee, and believing Confederate troops would quickly recapture the vacated territory. An unintended consequence of the evacuation were the logistical challenges posed by thousands of refugee slaves coming to the Union encampments in the area for protection from their former masters and Confederate patrols. A humanitarian crisis quickly developed, with nearly 10,000 people to be fed, clothed, and sheltered, especially given that Union supplies were already strained due to losses from the storm at Cape Hatteras. Northern missionary organizations began to send aid, and this developed into a series of initiatives aimed at caring for the formerly enslaved and preparing them for lives in freedom. Collectively, the initiatives became known at the time as the Port Royal Experiment, and they have subsequently been referred to as the Rehearsal for Reconstruction. With thousands of former slaves living in close contact with soldiers in the camps, tensions mounted and relationships with the refugees and morale among the soldiers declined dangerously. With the arrival of the third commander of the department, General Ormsby Mitchell, 900 acres of the former Drayton Plantation fish hall was set aside for a village of the formerly enslaved on land that they would occupy in homes they would own and self-govern under laws adopted by the election of officials by the residents of the town. Beginning in October of 1862 and later named Mitchelville, the town grew and prospered during the Union occupation, eventually being incorporated and reaching a population of over 3,500 residents by 1868. It was the first fully self-governing town of formerly enslaved people in the United States. The Battle of Port Royal Sound was a significant turning point in the American Civil War. It was the first major victory for federal forces in the war, and it established a foothold for the Union Army and Navy in the heart of Confederate territory and paved the way for future operations against Charleston and Savannah. Its impact on the lives of the residents, the Confederate military, and the citizens of the Confederate States was profound, and it dealt a powerful psychological blow with its Union enclave established in the epicenter of secession and the heartland of slavery. But the Battle of Port Royal Sound and the Union victory won was far from a flawless affair.